going to start Mishnah Hey. This continues from Mishnah Daled, and the first part has nothing to do with Biכורים as such, because it's going to talk about a situation relating to Gerim, or more correctly the children of Gerim. In the connection with the Biכורים, we had the problem of whether or not they could be considered to be properly able to say that the parasha of Asenu, etc., because they don't have the Jewish parentage. And the pasuk says, "Asher nishba Hashem la'avosenu." So the Mishnah now continues with an interesting din. By way of hakdama, as an introduction, you must understand that Kohanim are very restricted in whom they can marry. They cannot marry divorcees, nor can they marry Gioris. If a person became Jewish, she's forbidden to marry a Kohen. If she were pregnant at the time she became Jewish, then the child will also have the din of a Gioris, and he will not be able to marry her either. If, on the other hand, the parents became Jewish and subsequently gave birth to a child, that child is actually properly Jewish in all respects because it was being born to Jewish parents. Nonetheless, there is a machlokus in Gemara in Kiddushin between the Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, whom we're going to learn about in this Mishnah, and Rabbi Yossi over there, as to whether or not a Kohen can marry such a child when it grows up. So the Mishnah starts here. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, "Isha bas gerim lo sinase lekunu achetei imo Yisrael." Rabbi Eliezer holds that if the child is parentage is completely from Gerim all the way up, doesn't matter how many generations, if they're all being Gerim throughout, then that child should not marry a Kohen. The reason being that there's a pasuk in Yecheskel, which I'd like to read out, says, "V'almona u'grusha lo yikchu lahem nenoshim ki im basulos mizera beis Yisrael." There's got to be a basula, it's a virgin, from the zera Bas Yisrael, from the seed of a Bas Yisrael. It doesn't say it's got to be entirely from Bas Yisrael, but mizera. There's got to be at least some element of a Bas Yisrael in that, in her parentage. And he goes on to say, "Echod Gerim v'echod avodim meshuchrorim." The rule applies both to Gerim, which is a person just is a non-Jewish person who became Jewish, and then had the child we're talking about. But the same applies to avodim meshuchrorim. What happens in the case of an eved is that if a person acquires a slave from a non-Jewish source, then that slave has to go into the mikveh, and it has to keep certain dinim, like an eved. The dinim are that the eved has to do those things which a woman would be chayav to keep, but he doesn't have to do all the mitzvahs which a man would have to do. But then, if he then subsequently gets freed for one reason or another, then he has another dip in the mikveh, becomes free, and then he becomes a completely fully fledged Jewish person. However, he still has the rules of Gerim. He becomes Jewish, but he's not a complete meyuchastik Jew. he has the dinim of a ger. So the Mishnah is just telling us that the same rule will apply to gerim and to avodim shuchroim, va'afilu ad asoro doros, even to 10 generations. I mean, if every time the parents were avodim shuchroim or gerim, and they intermarried among themselves for 10 generations, and this 10 is not in fact exclusive. It's like it means however many there may be. It could be hundreds of generations. It could be the same thing. It takes asora because that's actually in the Torah in the connection with the Mamzer. It says asora doros. It's like a very, very large number, but it's not limiting. It's very unlikely that anybody would be marrying inbreeding with other gerim for 10 generations. It would presumably be unlikely that that would happen, and it would be much more likely that they would find some Jewish person who, they're all Jewish, but I mean when I say Jewish I mean Yisrael, Miyuchas, in that period. That's why it says 10. But if there weren't, if in fact all 10 generations had been with gerim, then according to Rebbe Eliezer, the daughter of such a marriage would not be allowed to marry a Kohen, because the Pasuk in Yecheskel prohibits it unless there is some element of yichus, some element of being descended from a Yisrael meyuchas. However, Rabbi Yossi in the Gemara in Kedushin disagrees with this, and he holds that as long as the child has been born from Jewish parents, and that would mean that at the time of their conception these two parents had become Jewish, and therefore although they may still be gerim, their child is a proper fully fledged Jew and can marry a Kohen. Nonetheless, the Kohanim were very machmer upon themselves, and they used to, in fact, it mentions in certain places they would only marry children of other Kohanim. They wouldn't even marry Israelim, because they were very careful about their kedusha, and therefore they made a practice of avoiding this sort of marriage. And in fact, if someone were to come to the Beis Din and ask, can I marry such a person, they would be told, it's better not to do so. So the halacha is, like Rabbi Yossi, that if b'di'avad, or b'di'evid, as we call it, they actually got married, then the halacha would be like Rabbi Yossi, and they can remain married, and there would be no need to part company. However, if they were asked, they were asking lechachile, can we entertain such a marriage, they would be told better not to. You shouldn't do so. To follow the opinion of Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov, at least lechachile. So that concludes the little digression regarding gerim, and now we're going back to where we were before, discussing those cases where there is a mitzvah to bring the Bikurim, but no mitzvah to do kriya. Says the Mishnah further, ho'apotropos, that's a guardian of the children's property. Let's say the parents passed away or were incapable, and the property was in the hands of the apotropos. He would bring the Bikurim, because there's a chiyuv to bring the Bikurim, but he can't actually say the kriya because he can't say it's my land. It's not his land at all. It belongs to the children, and he's just doing on their behalf, and therefore there's no way he can do the kriya. V'hashaliach. Similarly, if somebody sends an agent to take the Bikurim up because he can't manage to do it himself and sends an agent to do it, the agent can take the Bikurim up, but he is unable to make the kriya because it's not his property, it was not his fruit, and therefore in such situations he would be bringing it, but he would not do the kriya. interestingly, the question of the shaliach is more complicated than it sounds, because if, in fact, the person had intended to bring the Bikurim himself in the first instance, and when he took the Peiros, he had no intention of using a shliach to do it, the halacha seems to be that he cannot send the shliach, and the shliach can't bring them at all, because once they are what's called niru lekriya, once they have the din that they should have a kriya, and they should because he is the owner and he should have brought them and made the kriya. Since they were taken on that basis, you cannot then appoint a shliach at all, because it would be impossible to do the kriya afterwards. So the Mishnah would be talking in such a situation where he knew he wasn't going to be able to take the bikurim up, and he appoints the shliach to do so l'chachila. In such a situation, the shliach can take them. Then the question arises, what would happen if the shliach took them up and then the owner suddenly decides to turn up? He gets on an aeroplane and he suddenly decides, I better go along, I want to do it myself. Is it too late? And the opinion seems to be that just as the shaliach can't do the kriya, so also if the owner has sent the shliach, he cannot then substitute himself and suddenly decide to do the kriya. As usual, most things are a machlokus. It's not so clear cut, but that's an interesting situation. The Mishnah continues, other people who also can't do the kriya, that's for Eved. The Eved, obviously, it's not his property, and therefore it's not capable of saying it's my property and thanking HaKadosh Baruch Hu for what's been given to him. He has to bring it, but he does not make the kriya. V'isha, if the woman is bringing her own bikurim, her own things, she cannot say that the land was given to her, because the women did not receive a portion in the land. You're going to tell me, but surely Bnei Slavchad did receive a portion. Well, that's not a problem, because Bnei Slavchad actually got a Yerusha. That's not the same as being given a share in the land in the first instance, and therefore it doesn't count. And therefore, if a woman were to bring her own produce, and she can have her own produce in situations where she has her own little business, where the husband is not preventing her from bringing her bikurim. It could be, I suppose, a situation where she's got no husband, she has her own property. In such situation, there is no kriya. The tumtum v'androgynous. The tumtum is a person who we cannot tell whether or not he is male or female. He's one or the other, but we do not know which. And also an androgynous is normally called a hermaphrodite. It's a person who's got both simonim, both, and we'll learn a lot about that in the last perek of Bikurim, so we can defer a discussion about these two people until we get there. But either way, Mevian, they bring the Bikurim v'loi korim. Why is that? She'enom yecholim lomer shenosata li Hashem. They're unable to say that you have given this property to me, as we said before, because we're not entitled to a share in the land because of their condition. They may well have been they were not vadai zechorim. They have to be completely certain males before they would have got a share in the land, and therefore they are meviin ve'enom koirim.